Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for VistaView Solutions Q&A Cafe, how to do a bank reconciliation in SAP Business ByDesign with your host, Alex Waddell. My name is Catherine and I'll be facilitating today. Of course, we will be recording the session, so we'll keep everyone on mute and then we will send out the recording within a couple of days as per usual. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the questions or the chat box window at any time, and Alex will answer them towards the end of his presentation. And then, of course, don't forget to join us for next week's Q&A Cafe. That is going to be on Wednesday, and that's April already. Wednesday, April the 7th. That's going to be, again, with Alex. That's type of data uploads in SAP ByDesign, part 1, transactional data. You can find registration information about that on our resources page on our website or in the email sent out next week. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Alex.
Great, thanks, Catherine. Welcome, everyone. So today we're going to be looking at bank reconciliations. I'm going to specifically show you two different ways that we can do a bank reconciliation inside SAP ByDesign. So there's a manual method where you manually check off items that you want to clear. And then there is also a automated or at least partially automated method where you could load a file, which is commonly referred to as a BAI file. That's for, like, I think, Bank Accounting Institute. So it's a standard file that's fairly common across most banks in North America. So typically we are able, or your bank is usually able to provide you with that format. And that can be a good assistance for you, especially if you do clear a lot of, let's say, check transactions and you want the system to do some automated matching of checks for you, maybe becoming less important as we migrate into more of a ACH, EFT kind of world where chances are there's probably fewer transactions, but larger volumes as things kind of clear in batches. So I will show you both of those today. Either one works, either one could even be interchangeable on a day-to-day basis. So you have some options there. So anyway, let's just dive right in. I do not have a PowerPoint presentation like I usually do, so I guess you're welcome, or I apologize, whichever applies. But let's just go in, and maybe before we head into the bank reconciliation, just a reminder, or in case you aren't aware, let's just have a look at the GL accounts that tie into your banking, because I would like to just make everybody aware that ByDesign uses this concept of 3 different control accounts. And what I mean by control accounts is you cannot do journal entries into those accounts. You can only do what are called automated postings. And that means postings that come through your subledger. So either the creation of an AP check, a bank deposit, a bank transfer, bank payment advice, direct debit advice type of transaction like that. So it's some sort of a transaction. And those transactions always gateway through either the receipt or the disbursement account. So depending on whether the funds are going in or out of your cash. So typically you would see something like this, a credit balance in one, maybe a debit balance in the other. And then your cash receipt typically clears right away because you would typically apply your AR invoices and deposit the cash the same day. So there's typically not going to be a balance in here. Or a very short-lived balance maybe. But on your cash disbursement account, if you are writing checks or sending some sort of a payment that takes a while to clear the bank, then presumably this could be in a credit balance. And so what the bank reconciliation is doing is that final posting to move your transactions out of these 2 accounts and into your final cash resolution account. And that may be a little bit different than what you are used to seeing in other accounting software out there. I mean, if you are using something like QuickBooks or, well, pick a system, oftentimes all of the cash gets processed immediately through one GL account. And then the job of the treasury person doing the bank reconciliation is to really identify which of the transactions in this account have not cleared, and to just sort of identify them on a bank reconciliation report. And then what you're doing is you're justifying the GL balance versus your bank statement balance. So this world is a little bit different because your bank reconciliation process is establishing this balance directly from your bank statement. So whether it's imported or whether you're clearing it manually. And that balance reflects your true cash balance as of the last time you reconciled your bank. And best practice is probably to reconcile your bank on a daily basis. That's very doable and practical nowadays with online banking. So you could download the bank BAI file every single day. But that's just a business decision. You could reconcile your bank at whatever interval you want. Just keep in mind the posting in here represents your cash position based on that last bank rec. And therefore, all of the outstanding items are really represented in these two accounts here. And so that's just a slightly different format. It gets you to the same place. This is all controlled through GL determinations behind the scenes. I have had some clients that have maybe done things a little differently in the way they use these accounts. So I can't say for sure your configuration exactly matches this, but there's a good chance that it does. Okay, so that's the GL accounts. Let's talk a little bit about the banking. So we're going to go into liquidity management. I'm not going to spend too much time in here, but you would have had a bank account set up, and that bank account ties into your GL determination. So if I go into the configuration for this bank account, this is the GL determination. And once again, this may be, these account determination groups may be named specifically to your organization. This is a test environment, so things will look a little differently. Here's your bank account numbers. I will come back to this in a moment when we look at sort of the automated bank reconciliation through the BAI, because there is some touch points between the file that the bank sends you and how you set up this information in order for the BAI file to work properly. But before we do that, let's just go into our Bank of Cleveland and just do a manual bank reconciliation for that particular bank. So very straightforward process. If I go into my bank statements, all of my historical bank reconciliations are available for me to see. So I could look at, there's some pre-saved criteria here. You could, of course, activate the filters like you can on any kind of view in ByDesign. And you could then go through and set up your own filters, query on information. So if you're responsible for certain banks, certain companies, you could filter on that information, because this list is going to grow significantly, especially if you have multiple banks, multiple companies, and you're doing a daily bank reconciliation. So for example, if I were to invoke all my bank statements, I can go down and I can literally see all of the postings that have happened. And every bank statement has this concept of an opening balance and a closing balance. And then the difference between these two numbers are your debits and credits that have cleared on that particular statement. So prior day, if it's a daily reconciliation, but it could represent a different point in time as well. However, every time you start a new bank, it's going to have a opening balance that is the same as the prior day's closing balance. And that is sort of required by the system. And you can also see here in these columns that there is some post-processing. So when you are reconciling your bank, if something hasn't been completed or fully matched, it may indicate that there is a transaction waiting for you to clear. So you could essentially start a bank reconciliation post, let's say all but one of the transactions, maybe one of them you're still trying to resolve. And you could have a bank reconciliation left open for a period of time. That is fine. You could go back and you would see if it says required, you would go in and potentially go into that bank reconciliation. In addition to that, the system will also generate these transactions called payment allocations that may be sitting in preparation mode, meaning that there's something waiting to be cleared. So there's a couple of different ways the system's kind of letting you know that you may have potential transaction that's been, prepared, but hasn't been fully posted because perhaps you haven't entered the AP invoice to which you want to clear it, or whatever the situation is. Okay, so to start a new bank statement, I can do that from the previous window by going into bank statements and clicking the new button. I can also go directly into new banks for common task, gets you to the same screen, which is a 6-step wizard. And you just walk through this wizard and kind of answer the questions as you go. So if we're saying that this is a particular bank statement and we're going to just continue that Bank of Cleveland account, but you can see here you have access to all your companies, all your accounts. You can put in an ID and a description. And it's assuming that it's today's dates, or sorry, it's assuming it's yesterday's date because you're typically reconciling from the prior day information. And then the system is providing you the opening balance, and then it's also providing you a closing balance. Let me just make sure I'm selecting the right account. Okay, so that's fine. So I'm just going to invent a balance here because I'm not actually looking at my bank statement. But obviously in the real world, you would have your online banking open, or you would have a physical bank statement. And so you would be verifying if this opening balance does not match, you may need to go into your prior bank reconciliation and see, is there some sort of problem? So I would input a number here, which I'm going to reconcile to. And then when I go into the next button, it's going to give me all of the open transactions between those two GL accounts that I just showed you. So open disbursements, open receipts. And at that point, you can go through and you can just simply start clearing the transactions that are outstanding on your bank statement. Now, a certain amount of those transactions you will see here because they will probably match to outstanding checks and deposits and things like that. But potentially you're going to see items on your bank statement which are not here. And so those could range from bank fees or perhaps some sort of an automatic withdrawal that you don't normally set up and an outgoing check or a recurring payment in the system. And so by moving to the next tab, we have the ability to now augment what we've already proposed to clear by simply adding rows. And at this point, you could specify what kind of a transaction, and what you choose here will influence some of the behaviors of how you can apply it. But most of them are just sort of a label. It's just the incoming and outgoing you want to be careful of. So if I were to say that, for example, we had some other outgoing direct debit, maybe for a payment in the system, we could record the amount that we're seeing on our bank statement. And then there's additional clearing. The other one is not relevant because we're obviously matching a payment that we chose in the previous screen. This is a new transaction, so I'm going to click on the required button. And that's going to take me into the allocation window where I can do this allocation. So what does this allocation mean? In this particular case, I've put in it's a clearing transaction. So the journal entry that's ultimately going to be caused by this is $150 credit to my true cash bank account, and then a debit based on what I decide to set up in this window. So I do have access to all of my customers and suppliers. So you could potentially search for a transaction document. You could have also done that on that very first tab. So chances are this is not exactly what you need, but that feature is there. You could also match it to essentially an outstanding, oh, I apologize. This is what was really on the first screen. So this is matching it to an outstanding check or something in the system. This first tab is really matching it to something in the subledger of the payables or receivables. So this invokes all of your customers or suppliers. So this would essentially be implying that my $150 payment, I do have a payable outstanding, and so therefore I want my debit to be to the accounts payable account, and I want to close out that AP invoice. So that is also an option. This is the step that's showing you open documents inside your disbursements and receipts accounts. And this one is a very handy one, so it's allocation directly to a GL account. So very possibly, if it's sitting as a random item on your bank statement, probably with some sort of an automatic withdrawal that nobody has transacted for inside your software, and you can just choose to do that now. So rather than having somebody go and create an AP invoice and then doing this transaction, you can really skip over that subledger and just go directly to the GL account. So maybe this was for some sort of a charge on your system. I'll just make it prepaid. That's nice and easy. Don't have to worry about cost centers or anything. But you can see I do have access to my tax engine. I do have access to my projects and cost centers. So if I do need to sort of put in more robust information, if this does impact, goods and service or VAT tax or sales tax, anything like that, you can put all of that information into the screen to fully process it there. So I'm going to choose that option. And lastly, I will mention there's a bank charge. You could do the same thing by selecting your bank charge GL account. This just maps directly to a bank charge GL account through a GL determination. So it's a little bit of a simpler data entry. So once I get to that point and all of my items are essentially completely sort of saying not required, I am going to work towards the end of my wizard. So on my next step, I can do attachments, but just taking a little sneak preview across the top here, you can see that's the opening balance that I established, or that was established by the system. That's the random number that I entered to get us going. But what I've actually, in fact, cleared is $75,800. So obviously I have a difference between what my bank statement says and what I'm going to truly reconcile to. And that is going to prevent me from finishing this bank statement. So I could, in fact, go all the way back to my first step and I could modify this balance to force this to work. I won't bother doing that for this little video. I just want to point out that you can add attachments here. So if you have downloaded a bank statement, you might want to upload it and save it with this. You've got one final review. So here's where we can see our differences. And this is where we're having an issue. So obviously it's not going to let me confirm this. It's just giving me an error here. And it's saying that this is essentially out of balance. So if this was in balance, then the post button would be available and I could post this bank reconciliation. And so it would do the debit and credit to the true cash accounts and the debits and credits to your clearing accounts, or into this case, I think we selected a prepaid account. So whatever accounts you've chosen, it will just book all of those entries for you. And because of this flexibility in this create and edit items, I should just point out that I think what I'm seeing more and more commonly is people will do daily bank reconciliations and they will use their bank statement as a significant component of just all of their daily postings because it's right there. So why bother creating AP invoices or things like that if there's sort of automated transactions coming through the system? So do keep that in mind. You can always skip over that step of creating direct debits and things like that as clearing transactions because you can just simply do it in here. So that's totally optional. It's up to you. Sort of brings us to the end of how to do a manual bank reconciliation. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and I'm going to start talking about the automated one, which is what we do with a BAI file. So first of all, what is a BAI file? Maybe I'll just save this. Might want to come back to it later, but I'm not going to be able to post it. So a BAI file is a file you download from the bank that is going to look something like this, probably a lot longer if you have a lot of transactions, but it has a bunch of what kind of looks like gibberish, but there's meaning in here. So these 1, 2s, and 3s, these are headers for the rows. These just indicate the row type, like whether this is a header row or whether it's a transactional row. And so inside these headers is information about the bank account, the bank itself, information about the file, and then there's some summary information at the bottom. And then everything in between are all of the transactions that we are loading. And so you can maybe make that out here that there's some check information in here. So check 14731. There are dollar amounts in this file, but the dollar amounts are reflected as whole pennies. So you won't ever see decimals. So it can be a little bit hard to decipher this. But let's just set that aside for one moment, and I will just quickly show you how we tie that in to the bank reconciliation. So typically, it's not too much effort. Even a non-programmer person like me can usually get the BAI file to import, and you can probably do it too. So if you go into your banks, I have a specific bank reconciliation testing file that I just set up for this little demo. I'm going to walk into that bank file. And so what I have set up is a bank code, and there's two very important pieces of information. So one is the national bank code, 3227198. Where is that set up? When you start to set up a bank, you have to associate, think of this screen as almost like the bank branch. And then there's many branches to the overall bank itself, the banking institution. So that's what we set up in the bank ID. So if we drill down into this file, here's where we can set up the national bank code. And so this is a number that I just sort of made up, but the national bank code is available on the internet. You could go find it out. Your bank can tell you what your national bank code is. And you should be able to actually find this number in your file. and it needs to match. So there is a verification happening when the file gets loaded into the system that the national bank code embedded in the file is set up properly in here. And so, and this I think is a 9-digit number. The system enforces that, so that's not usually too difficult. And then the other number it's going to validate is the actual bank account itself. So as we're setting up our bank, we move over to the bank accounts. This particular bank, I've only set up a single account. You could, of course, have multiple accounts. You could also import a BAI file that has multiple accounts embedded in it. That's all something we would have to sort of test and sort out with your bank to sort of see what sort of options they have with their BAI files. If you've never heard of a BAI file and you do online banking with your bank, you could just try going into your online banking and look for reports. And sometimes, I mean, every bank's website looks a little different, but sometimes there's maybe report formats, drop-down screen or field somewhere. You could go and just see if you can find an option to download a file that says BAI, and they may give you multiple options. I would probably try to download all of them, and then you could open them up and kind of see, and we could do some testing or we could assist you with that. If that option isn't available, then usually it's just a conversation with your bank to get them to enable that. So then the second piece I'll mention is the bank account number. So this is not a key index field, and what I mean by that is this field is updatable. So if this was set up differently or incorrectly in your system, you can go in and fix it. The one thing you can't fix is your bank account ID. This is sort of an ID that you've invented or we invented when we set up the system for you. None of the files rely on this ID. Which is a good thing because this ID, the way it's formatted, the way it's set up, doesn't really mean anything. It's just an indicator and it's always going to be associated with this particular bank account. So the good news is if this doesn't match, so let's say you were missing the leading zeros, which is a possibility because you can see in this file, there are leading zeros. So if you had only set up your bank account like this file would reject when you try to load it. So that's important to note. If you are getting rejection information when you try to test your file, even within the rejection information, you'll get a little red bar at the bottom of your screen, and it will tell you, I cannot find national bank code of this, and I cannot find bank account like this. And so then the first thing you can do is come back and check those two numbers and see if they do tie in like this. And potentially, all you have to do is just do a tweaking on the format if you had a more abbreviated version loaded in here, or maybe you didn't even have a real bank account number. Maybe you just had the word checking or something in here. So make sure all of that information ties. That's how it sort of communicates with the BAI file. So let's move over and look at how do we load that information. So you may have noticed it when I was in the bank statements that you could do a new bank statement upload from here. You can also do it from the work center, and you can go to your inbound files. Two different ways, get you to the same sort of place. So I can do new inbound files. This actually supports a number of different files. So there's bank advices for actually generating transactional data, lock boxes for things like if you have a relationship with your bank for them to clear your accounts receivable for you and send you a file. So there's various ones. So make sure you're choosing bank statement. Indicate your company, indicate your bank. So we're going to use that bank reconciliation testing bank that I set up. And then there's only one option here, which is the BAI2 file. And then we're going to add the file that we want to upload. So I have that file that I was just showing you sitting on my hard drive. I'm just going to grab it from my Windows Explorer and drop it into here. And then I'm going to hit the add button. And it's sort of sitting here kind of queued up, but you have to click the Start File Upload button in order for the file to go. And at that point, you are going to get a message. So if there was a problem with that national bank code or with your bank number, this is where I mentioned you would get that red bar telling you that it doesn't know what to do with this file. The file's, got some sort of a problem. So this is the first potential roadblock you run into. I've tested in advance, so we're good. Everything is loaded. So we now have a bank reconciliation automated one sort of keyed up. So I'm going to go back to my liquidity management. I'm going to go back into my bank statements. And we can see here that we now have this file which says BAI testing. So let's just pop back into that file for a second and have a look at some other information. So I mentioned there's opening balance, there's closing balance. So that is embedded in the file as well. So there's our uh, pennies and dollars that get us to our $702,000. And then it's validating this 678. And so once again, that could be another error or issue you get if you are doing a file that doesn't have the same opening the same opening balance as the prior day's closing balance. You have to resolve that issue because presumably maybe you've downloaded the wrong days. So your ranges might be off, something like that. So you could have some sort of situation like that. But if everything looks good, you get a file like this that says in preparation. Now, at this point, I could go in and I could hit the view button and it can kind of look at this file. It still hasn't really been released. So I just see a bit of information. When I go into the transactions, I can see all of those checks that are sitting there that are proposed in the file. And I could even do some manipulation in this file. That wouldn't really make sense probably. So typically all you do is you're going to release this. So full transparency, I did not test this in advance because once you release it and start transacting, while things are reversible, it sort of clutters up the screen. So I didn't want you to have to see that. So I'm optimistic this is going to work, but we'll have a look and see. So we're going to release this bank statement. We're saving it. We can post it. And then what I expect is I am going to have, because I don't have a bunch of fictitious information to necessarily match the file. So you can see that the file has been posted, but it says there's some post-processing required. That's not surprising to me because I did not have checks set up in my system to match those transactions. So, but that's okay. So keep in mind that this is sort of a multiple things happening at once. So this has created all of those transactions to sort of update your true cash position based on your bank reconciliation. So right now, what's sitting in your GL for your cash is really matching your bank statement. Sorry, I wanted to go to journal entries. So if we look here at this bank statement, what it's done is all of these adjustments between our disbursement accounts. And because that file was full of nothing but checks, it's credited our true cash, it's debited this. However, what has not necessarily happened is the clearing event to say, well, which check do I need to close out in accounts payable against this? So while the balance of the cash disbursement account may be correct, it's not truly reconciled because we haven't done the matching exercise. So that's what was showing there. So I mentioned there's a couple of different ways you could see that. If we go to payment allocations, you can see that, okay, there are some allocations. I could go this way and I could start working on these. How do I need to reconcile these? I could also do it through the bank statement screen. So I can go right into this posted bank statement and you can see it saying, okay, there's stuff required. I'm gonna click on this. And all of these items are sitting here waiting to be reconciled. So I'm a little disappointed because I had tried to put a check through with this ID number and this amount just before our call. I was hoping it would clear. I'm not totally surprised it didn't because there's a lot of things to consider, like it's validating the dates and things like that. So it's possible, even though I thought I was careful, that I backdated my check. They might have had some trouble doing the automated matching process. If that had been successful, you would see that this says not required. And then essentially check 1414731 would just show as, sort of completed in the system. So if we go in here and we go into our payment monitor, just to have a look at checks for a moment, here's where I set up check. Oh, yeah, so here's where I set up check 14731, and it's still saying in transfer, therefore not confirmed, but it's got these other transactions that are confirmed. One of these should match to this. So if we go back into our file, let's go into our required, see if we can match it, or if I do have a date issue. So you can see that this screen looks very similar to the one we already showed you, where you can go and you've taken, instead of having an item that you created manually because you're keying it off a bank rec, the system has created these items for you, but it takes you into the same screen. So do you want to apply this to an outstanding invoice? Do you want to apply this to a specific payment? Um, so it is showing me a payment matching that amount. But I suspect it's because I was doing this manually and fiddling with the dates. It's not actually letting me do the manual allocation. So you shouldn't have that same experience. It's a little bit difficult to kind of set this up in a test environment because I have to sort of pull things out of the file and try and mimic in here. So I'm not totally surprised we're having a little issue with this, but yeah, not allocated completely. So I don't think that one's going to work. But let's save and go back. If I close this, yeah, so it's still saying post-processing required. So in the real life world, I mean, checks are very straightforward. So I typically don't see problems with this. It'll find your document ID and it'll also validate on the amount. And then based on thresholds you've configured in the system, um, you could set a threshold of a few pennies if you wanted to in case the bank clears something, at a slightly different amount. But if these match, then the system will essentially clear that transaction out and you will no longer have, an official outstanding check in the system. I'll hand it back to you, Catherine, and thank you everyone for joining.
Awesome. Yes, as Alex said, thank you so much everybody for joining, and thanks so much, Alex, for hosting. Again, please make sure to join us next week for our types of data uploads in SAP ByDesign. That'll be part 1, transactional data with Alex again. We'll, of course, have recorded this session, and we will send it out to you within a couple of days in the email as per usual. Thanks so much again, everybody, and have a lovely rest of your day.